So, Ellie, why
Yeah.
don't you give us an introduction to who you are? I know I call you the corn queen, and you kind of didn't like that. And so then I kind of revised it to the student of all things corn and traditional food. Does that feel better?
That seems pretty accurate. Yeah.
So tell
Yeah.
us a little about yourself.
Sure. I've been living up here for 17 years now. Um, and yeah, the I think in terms of corn, in the context of corn, the only thing that makes me special or notable in any way at all is that I happen to be doing this in northern Minnesota. There's probably, 2 million people in the world that know how to do it better than I do. But being up here, it's kind of a unique thing to be doing. So, and that to me just directs me back to the fact that we are so incredibly lucky to be able to grow this plant up here still. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
that there are some really neat short season flint corns that can be really successful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cindy, why don't you introduce yourself to the group?
I'm Cindy Hale. I'm the, what am I again? I'm the producer, infrastructure, and education coordinator for the Finland Food Chain. So that basically means that I work with producers and growers to try to help facilitate finding them what their resources are and getting everybody connected. And so it's been a wonderful, fun, almost year now with the Finland Food Chain, and we've got a lot of really super cool projects. And Ellie and I met, when do we meet in the spring? Somehow? I
I
can't,
think I just responded to like the monthly newsletter in the spring and said, "Hey, I do corn, and I've had a lot of people ask me about how I do this process, so I'd like
yeah,
to offer that if I can."
yeah. And so then Ellie and I chatted, and I'm like, we should do a Zoominar on this. And she's like, okay. We were kind of hoping that we'd be able to do face-to-face stuff by this time of year, but no. So maybe in the spring, we'll do the face-to-face hands-on tortilla making, but Zoominar is going to help us for the time being. All right. So basically, this is what we're going to try to do. It's a lot to cover. Lori and I and Ellie had a fabulous day. 3 science geeky women having fun doing corn nixtamalization. We spent a whole day basically going over this whole process, taking lots of pictures and videos, and now it's been dissected down into this 1-hour presentation. So we're going to be going over things really fast, but as I said, we're recording it, and all the slides and the presentation will be available on the Finland Food Chain website. So you don't need to get down all the details. As Ellie said, you can certainly write down some notes as you're going along if you want to. Yeah. All right, next slide. And next slide. And there's Ellie. Yay. And I know that, and she'll mention this, that one of the books that helped Ellie kind of get inspired was Buffalo Birdwoman's Garden. Is that correct?
Yep.
Yeah. And there's actually this link that's on the presentation is a really neat, it's the Minnesota Historical Society did a little kind of discussion about the history of the book and how it came to be, and a little history on the author and her wonderful, amazing thing. So I thought that was a neat link that people might enjoy following afterwards. So next slide. So corn, as some people maybe know, corn's been a really central food in Mesoamerica, Central South America for millennia. At least 8,700 years ago, it was domesticated, and it was domesticated from a wild grass called tenoshite. And I'm sure I mispronounced that. Anybody know how to pronounce it better than me? And I actually, before we get too much farther, if people have questions, you can type them into the chat box And when you type into the chat box, be sure on the bottom, there's a drop down menu that says to, and it'll either say to all panelists or all panelists and attendees. Make sure you include all panelists and attendees, and then everybody will be able to see your posts. And I'll be monitoring the chat line or the chat box and suggesting questions, and people can jump in. Lori and Ellie can jump in as they need to. All right, next slide. Z-maize, Z-maize, Z-maize. That's the scientific name of corn. There are dozens, probably hundreds of varieties. So don't get bogged down on that. Next slide. So one of the questions that comes up all the time is, what is flint corn? Flint corn does have a specific variety, indorata, which is Latin for hard outside shell. Next slide. So flint corn is unique among corns in that it has that really hard outer shell, which makes it really good for drying, and it also has lower water content, makes it more resistant to freezing and makes it preserve better. So next slide. So sweet corn doesn't really dry as well. And field corn, kind of like a not as tasty sweet corn, usually used for silage, that kind of thing. Dent corn is the closest thing to flint corn that's not actually flint corn. It's a subgroup of field corn. And this picture, when we were doing our little girly geek out thing, doing our hominy and nixtamalization, we noticed that some of my corn that I had brought was this unusual translucent stuff, and I think it's some kind of a dent corn. And typically the dent corn has a higher starch content and lower protein content, so it's a little different. Next. And the super cool thing about flint corn is that it is really much more nutritious. Ellie pointed this out to us, that it has 13% protein, sometimes more, compared to about 9% protein of other varieties. So flint corn is unique in that characteristic. So Painted Mountain is a variety that I grow, and Ellie, is that the variety you grow?
Yeah, that's the variety that we grow, and I've been growing that for even before I moved up here, so probably close to 20 years now, or 18 years, something like that, and selecting our own seeds since, for those years, since the first year that we bought it.
Yeah, so you definitely have a Finland adapted variety of Painted Mountain corn, which I think is just uber cool. So, and then Bear Island is another really popular flint corn. Both Painted Mountain and Bear Island have a really wide variety of color, so they're really interesting for that reason. I'm sure there are I know there are lots of other varieties. And so, yeah, people type into the next slide, Lori. Let us, type into the chat box what varieties you grow, how do they perform. Next slide. And if you have any tips for growers, especially in these northern short season climes, I know Sherry Rovig and we live in Clover Valley, and we're a half a zone warmer than you Finlanders. And we also have a little bit longer growing season. Oh, Bloody Butcher and Seneca Redstock in southeastern Minnesota. Those sound cool. So, somebody had bird problems. Yes, birds like corn. Yep. Any suggestions on how to solve that? Ellie, do you have problems with birds in your corn?
I've never had problems with birds, not birds of any kind. Yeah, I don't know about that. Okay. Maybe it's because we're so far north.
Okay. Yeah. So for seed saving, the recommendation for corn in general is to isolate it 1 to 2 miles, which in some areas is really hard to achieve. And then Ellie, when you are doing your seed selection, you're selecting for?
We've always chosen the seed from the largest, longest, and most uniform cobs. Now, in our conversation on our day, I posed a question and I asked this of myself. Who knows what the best yield comes from? Is it the cob with more seeds, or is it the cob with seeds that are bigger, or is it the larger cob with smaller seeds? So it's just interesting. You'd really have to get into some numbers and probably some weight measurements or something like that. But just intuitively, I've always chosen just the largest, longest, most uniform cobs. And this year when I was selecting seed, I also chose the kernels that were also the plumpest once I shucked them. So if I had two cobs that looked identical, when I shucked them, one of those cobs, for some reason, the seeds were just fuller, and I saved those seeds as like grade A. So,
Okay.
and then after that, I choose color preference because, you know, we all have color preferences.
Yeah.
But I have no, that's just my intuition. I'd be curious to hear from the chat box if anyone has any other suggestions or experience with selecting seed, because
Absolutely. Yeah, we'd all be interested in that. So if anybody wants to totally geek out on that, we would love to know. All right. So one of the things Ellie told me that I was like, oh, I'm totally going to do that, is she sprouts her corn before she plants it. You know, I've always had problems with germination success and probably little rodents getting in there and eating my corn. So I'm going to totally try this in the spring.
And for sprouting, I guess we didn't go over, but to sprout them, I just moisten a towel. I guess you could use paper towel too, but moisten that towel and keep it moist. And it takes maybe 5 to 7 days, and keep it in a warm area, I'd say, is about what I experience.
Cool. So we have some really wonderful videos on harvesting and drying and shucking and winnowing, but looking at the time, I think in order to get to the core of what we came here for, which is the nixtamalization process, I think we're going to just have to kind of go through those really quick.
The nixtamalization is the tricky part. That's the one everyone asks about. So
yeah,
let's get to that.
So hominy is nixtamalized corn. Take it from here, Ellie.
Talking to me? Okay.
Yeah, Ellie. Sorry.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. So I guess I learned about hominy in the Native American circles, communities that I've been a part of, just eating it in soup mainly. And then I learned, I guess, from reading that the really incredible thing about hominy is that it releases a couple of amino acids that then it breaks them down and makes them available to us, that then makes the hominy into a complete protein in and of itself. So that was enough for me to want to nixtamalize all of my corn because I thought, well, why not?
Why wouldn't I?
Why not make it into that type of a food? So I started the long, laborious learning process of just doing that, through trial and error. And like you said, starting with the instructions from the Buffalo Bird Woman book and just learning about it. So
cool. Next slide. So one of the things that we talked about, and we didn't have full information, so I went out and got a little geeky and did some research on this before the presentation. So pellagra is one of the nutritional deficiencies that can result from corn that hasn't been nixtamalized. So it's common in, it used to be common in areas of the world where corn was the primary source of protein, but if it wasn't nixtamalized, it wasn't complete, and so then they were deficient in both niacin and tryptophan, which is a important essential amino acid. So corn contains niacin. It's a form of niacin, but humans can't digest it. And then corn contains 4 really wonderful complex proteins, but as they are, they're deficient in 2 essential amino acids, lysine and tryptophan. But nixtamalization makes both of those available. So it makes the niacin B3 ready for human body to digest it. And it inhibits this was a new piece that I found out that I thought was super cool. The nixtamalization process inhibits the function of phytic acid, which is something that's found in the germ of all grains, apparently, which can, in different situations, impair the absorption of iron, zinc, calcium, and other minerals. So the nixtamalization process actually helps us increase our absorption of minerals that are present in the foods that we eat, which is super cool.
Mm-hmm.
And then the nixtamalization process, it really literally unfolds. Anybody who's like geeky on protein, they're long molecules that are all folded up, right? And the nixtamalization process causes those proteins to unfold, and in that process makes all 9 essential amino acids available. And which was even cooler was that it makes them available for absorption, but they don't get lost in the boiling liquid because the gelatinization of the starches through the nixtamalization process kind of holds everything in, which I thought was super awesome. So
that's amazing.
I'm totally geeked out here. And of course, it improves the quality of the final dough, the hominy for tortilla making, which, yeah. So I put in a lot here on the pH and the science of nixtamalization. We're going to go through this pretty quickly. Again, remember, you're going to be able to see this and read it. So one thing about pH, alkali is a high number, 8 and up, and alkalis have this hydrogen oxide ion. It's a oxygen molecule and a hydrogen molecule stuck together, and it happens to have a negative charge. Next. And then on the acid side of the pH, which is 6 down to 1, that's reactive because it has an excess of hydrogen ions. So a little hydrogen atom floating around all by itself in water, which has a positive charge. So if you take a positive charge and a negative charge, what do they want to do? They want to join each other up. So hydrogen oxide ions and the single H with the plus hydrogen ion, when they get together, they make water, which is the fundamental basis of all life as we know it. And so it's a really cool thing that this nixtamalization process is really, it demonstrates fundamental chemical processes that happen in all places of the living world in which we live. And it's all about this balancing of hydroxide and hydrogen ions. Add a little heat and voila, you get something really cool. So for those who really want to geek out, when you say the word lye, there's a lot of different kinds of lye. So if you want to geek out on that, this is some stuff you can look at later and do some looking up. So we're going to launch right into how to make lye. The most important thing is that you use stainless steel, glass, or enamel cookware, as long as the enamel cookware doesn't have cracks. And that's because lye, being alkaline, is reactive with metals like aluminum, cast iron, things like that. So you don't want your lye reacting with the vessel that you're cooking it in. A lot of the books and the websites, how to make lye, they say you got to use hardwoods, you got to freak out and have hardwood ash. But Ellie, do you?
No, I've used just whatever's in the wood stove. And I've used, by the way, just pure softwood ash too. If I'm burning spruce branches all summer, I've just used those ashes. And there's no problem. I think that might be why I generally need to use more ash than those original instructions that I found. But I don't think softwood ash impedes the process in any way, as far as I know.
So I think that's really cool because obviously we have a lot of softwoods up here, and so people don't have to freak out about needing hardwood ash. So when you're making a lye, you do want to use a water that is fairly neutral. So melted snow or rainwater, something that's about a pH of 7 and doesn't have a lot of minerals in it. So like my well water is super hard, has a lot of iron in it. And iron has lots of pluses and minuses on it. It can do all kinds of reactive stuff. And so I would use some kind of spring water. If I were going to make lye, I would not use my well water. So just be conscious of the water you're going to use. Ellie, you use rain and snow water, right?
Rain, snow, lake, creek, you know, whatever you have. And here in Finland, for instance, and probably a lot of the Northland, we have a lot of wells. So if what you have is well water, just literally walk to the lake or the creek. I don't think the water has to be, you know, specially bought or special in any way, except what you're saying, maybe avoid that, you know, deep down mineral water. So any kind of surface water, because you're boiling the heck out of it. So there's not going to be any risk for any, you know, pathogens or whatever.
Cool. All right. And so Ellie's recipe ended up making a lye that had a pH of about 10. And because I'm geeky, I had to test it. But you've never really tested the pH of it, right?
No.
You do everything by taste and feel, which I think is really super cool. And we'll talk about that in a little bit longer. But I think the important piece is that if you look at this range of pH, you know, her lye is less caustic than ammonia. So if you use ammonia, you know, it's just a little bit more caustic than baking soda and antacid. So you don't have to worry about burning yourself. We'll see more about that. So Ellie's going to talk us through her process. So there's going to be videos and a step-by-step process. And at the end of the slides that show that process, there's going to be a complete list. And again, remember, we're recording this. You're going to be able to download it. So don't freak out about getting all the details down. Okay, next.
So Ellie, here, tell us about how much of the ash you use to water.
Yes, and here we were correcting this just right before we started, but the ratio is actually 3:2. So please take a note. This is your first of those. Oh. This is the first of the 5 very important notes that I'm allowed to tell you to write down. So yeah, and my original instructions from the Buffalo Bird Woman book were 3 double handfuls to 2 quarts of water. But on this day where we went and did this together, we decided to measure that into a volume so that we could tell you that. And we ended up with 3 quarts of water to 2 quarts of ash. And with our ashes on that day, well, you'll find out further in the presentation. But so yeah, you just gather the ashes right out of your wood stove. And it's fine if there's little coals in there. It's fine if there's like whatever in there, you know. I actually burn, you know, the dust from the floor, and I burn my eggshells in their eggshell container, and none of those things are going to make any difference to these ashes. So, and the coals, that'll all get strained out. So there you see, there's just little bits that looks like maybe some fir needles that got carbonized. So none of those things are going to be a problem for you. So just add the ashes to the water and boil it rapidly for 15 minutes. That's the next number that you can write down. Just boil rapidly for 15 minutes. That's all it needs. Then remove it from heat and allow it to settle. The settling may take like another 15 minutes. It takes a while, but you let it settle until it's just very clear on top. You can clearly see that there'll be something to pour off. And then as you pour the liquid off, I generally, yeah, you can pour it through a colander and then you'll catch your coals and whatnot. But you pour it off until you start to see a slurry coming. It's pretty self-explanatory. And then you'll have a liquid, and that liquid will be a little bit mixed up again. So you let it set in the new container that you poured it into. And depending on the quantity that you're making, if you have just a small quantity like we were making on that day, we realized we should pour it into a tall, narrow vessel, because then it could settle better that way. And then we took this little live video of it settling because it was so fun to watch that liquid just expand and expand and expand. So you can see how that worked in the jar there. And yeah, it did take a while, 15 or 20 minutes. So yeah, again, 3 to 2. 3 quarts
Yeah,
water.
and we corrected that slide, and then we ended up having to have Lori pull up the slides that she had, so that's why it's incorrect. But the ratios will be correct in the slide presentation that we put up on the website. My apologies on that one.
Okay, awesome, no problem. But yeah, 3 to 2. So that's that ratio, and then okay, so then with starting off with that 3 to 2, then what we did with this batch of ashes, I diluted it first 16 to 1, just to be safe. Dilute it further than you think you're going to need to make sure that you don't burn your tongue by doing the taste test method. So, I wanted to speak to this. Cindy was saying that our pH was about 10, and that I've never tested the pH. I just do it with this taste test method. So you put a little bit on your tongue and you taste it until you get the right concentration, and I'll describe that. But the thing that you said, Cindy, was that you tested all 3 of these different dilutions that we had created, and they all tested out at a 10, correct?
Yeah, so I thought that was really, really cool and interesting. So
the one that was too strong tested at 10, the one that was perfect tested at 10, and the one that was too weak tested at 10.
Right.
So actually the pH strip will not give you the proper concentration. Unfortunately, I mean, I would like an easier tool for people, but
yeah, no, I think what was really super cool about that was I think people tend to assume that their own senses aren't as reliable as some kind of test, a meter that's going to read it or something. And I think what I found really interesting about the fact that I collected samples from all these, and we tested all of these strips, all of these steps, and they all were within the 10 range of the pH. And that says a couple of things to me. One is that first we have to remember that the pH scale is a logarithmic scale. So each unit is 10 times more than the unit before. So for example, a pH of 9 is 10 times, or a pH of 10 is 10 times stronger than a pH of 9. And a pH of 11 is 100 times more alkali than a pH of 9, because it goes up in a multiplicative way. So it goes up really, really fast. And so there's a lot of stuff that can happen in that 10 zone that we can obviously taste and perceive because we did, and you do. So I think that was the kind of aha cool moment for me, was that we should learn to trust ourselves a little bit more, and maybe not totally rely on, test strips and pH meters all the time.
Sure.
That'd be crazy.
Okay, so yeah. So okay, so let me describe. Sure, we could look at that.
No.
So
yeah.
So let me describe this test. And by the way, this was also in the Buffalo Bird Woman's Garden. And this, I think, is the ash to water ratio I may have been able to figure out, but this information that was in that book that was shared by those people back then is absolutely priceless. So,
and this embedded video, so the one with the one that's showing here, that embedded video is Ellie walking you through the process of learning how to do this Ellie's Way tongue tingle test.
I just sip a tiny bit and then let it be on the front of my tongue. And I'm looking for what is called, and this is also coming from that book, I'm looking for what she called in that book a bite. It's supposed to bite your tongue. And it just feels like a pinprick. And what I found through the trial and error of the different strengths is that that pinprick, within about 2 seconds, so a 2-second count, 1 1,000, 2 1,000 prick, seems like the perfect concentration to cook the corn, get it all softened and nixtamalized, and still not have to rinse it out. But that window, I would say, is anywhere from like a 1/2 second prick all the way to a 3-second prick. So that, if you think about that, how that concentration would relate to that timing of that prick, you can see that's a pretty big window.
That is a big window. Yeah.
So you're not at high risk for ruining your food with this process. I have ruined it, but following this sort of these parameters, I think you're not at high risk. So, all right, please test that. And we did have an interesting experience that's important to share on the day when we were the 3 of us together, because Lori was tasting and she had to hold it for a second or 2 longer for want of a place to spit it out, because you do spit it out after you taste it.
Yeah. Do not swallow.
Do not swallow. And it did burn her tongue. And I've had my tongue burnt also. So just a note on safety. Once you get your lye from the ashes that were boiled, dilute it further than you think you have to. So using our instructions, I would use the ratios that we provided and then dilute it 16:1. So that is 1 tablespoon of lye in a cup of water. And just sip a tiny bit of that onto the tip of your tongue and see what you taste. And also we had variety within our group. So myself and Cindy had a pretty similar experience with how the lye tasted. But Lori, it could have been due to holding it on her tongue for a couple seconds too long, or it could be because she has a more sensitive tongue. So that brought us to think that we should share with everyone, well, maybe have multiple people testing just to sort of corroborate the results. But yes, take care in testing. There is no way that none of the lye that I've ever made, however strong it's been, 20:1 concentrate, 30:1 concentrate, has ever burned my skin. It has maybe made it like a little wrinkly like you do get with bleach, but it's never burned me to the touch. So it's not dangerous in that way.
And let me just interject. Although it did quote unquote burn my tongue, I had no lasting effects, no ill effects whatsoever, just that my tongue was a little tingly for a while. So it was not a safety issue. I did not have any significant true burn.
Got it. Great. Thank you for that. Thank you for that correction, clarification. Awesome. Yeah, and that's the only burn I've ever had. I think a burn that I had on my tongue had about a 1.5 day effect, if I recall. I couldn't taste the lye all through the rest of that day, and the second day I was pretty reluctant also.
That's very similar to mine. It was about a 1.5 days.
Okay. Yep. Okay. But it's not like, it's not urgent care.
No.
Yeah. Okay.
All right.
But anyhow,
we are kind of starting to run low on time. So if we want to have time for some Q&A at the end, we need to kind of speak through now.
Okay. I'll try and hurry up. So yeah, start off with that. And in our case, I tasted it at that 16:1 ratio, and I just tasted absolutely nothing even close to a tingle. So then we went down, and we got to an 8:1 ratio. So if your tongue, if you get a little, so the bite is like a pinprick, and if you get it after 3 seconds, it's a little bit too weak. If you get it after 1 second, it's a little bit too strong. Shoot for that 2-second mark. And I'll just say a little bit about that. If it's too weak, it won't soften the corn enough. You'll cook it and cook it and cook it and cook it, and it just won't get soft. And if it's too strong, it'll cook your corn down into mush. It'll just start to dissolve the corn. And also it'll impart a bitter flavor in the corn, which then requires leaching that flavor back out. So if it's a little too strong, it'll impart that bitter flavor. And if it's much too strong, it'll dissolve the whole thing, both of which have happened to me. Yeah, and I will say that the way that I do it diverges from everything I've ever read, because I've read that you need to rinse the corn and rub it to get the outer hulls off, and then soak it and rinse it and leach it a couple of times after you're done. And I haven't found, I just do it the way that I figured out, that takes basically like the least amount of water, because that's anyone who hauls their own water knows why you'd want to do that. And yeah, so I have not had to do that rinsing or the rubbing part of the process. And I don't know if there's some advantage to doing it that way. It seems like everything I've read and heard is that you're supposed to do that. There's probably grandmothers somewhere that would chide me for not including those steps. But this is the way that I found that is the easiest for us. So, okay, go ahead. Yep. So yep, just a little bit on the front of your mouth, and be ready to spit it out. Good point. And then you can rinse your mouth, but you should just get like a little bite, and then, your tongue might be a little bit numb, and that's about all you'd have.
And so when we were doing it, Ellie was very like super iterative. Like she said, I'm going to taste this, so I'm going to add this, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do that. So for this presentation, I tried to like narrow that down to a little bit more, okay, do this, do that, kind of cookbooky, just because I know some people prefer that.
Yeah.
But I think the power of it all is this teaching your palate this tongue pricky test, just by tasting things at different dilutions until you're like, oh, now I get it. Now I get it.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, and just if you don't feel, when I was first learning about it, if you don't feel like you taste it and you're like, well, I think I understand what that tasted like, but I'm not quite sure, just taste it again and try different things, water it down more, water it down less. Just change those increments of the ratio of water, use small increments to change them so that you don't end up slightly burning your tongue.
Right. Right.
Yeah. So we came all the way down to an 8-to-1 ratio. And I love making the lye in a concentrate because it stores forever. And then there you have a whole bunch of lye, and you can make a bunch of different batches of hominy. So I usually I made like, 2 gallons of a 20-to-1 concentrate last year, just so that I would have it available. I don't even think it freezes. I don't actually know. Or if it freezes, it doesn't hurt it to freeze. Yeah.
So this is kind of where we're like, okay, so we made lye, and you can store that lye, be smart and label it, because then you don't like mistake it for something else. But so this making the lye is one step that can be done at any time. And Ellie actually brought with us, so we made some lye that day, which turned out to be an 8-to-1 concentrate, but Ellie brought some from home that was a 20-to-1 concentrate, and we used both. So it was really kind of cool to just, oh, okay, we're getting this. So so next is, so now you got lye sitting in your pantry, and now you want to make hominy. Here we go. Bang.
Yep. So all the rest of it is much easier, and let's speed through this so we can get to questions. You put the corn into the lye. Once you have it to its proper 2-second biting the tongue concentration, it turns yellow and floats.
Huh. Look at that. That process is already starting.
And look at the difference in color.
Oh yeah, so look at that versus that.
It's instant. Something happens instantly.
It gets much more yellow.
There's a real magic going on here. And yeah, 7-to-3 ratio. That's great. And cook it for an hour and 15 minutes. Or an hour and a half. But definitely at least an hour and 15 minutes.
So
by the way, you can't cook it too much.
Right. And that was something that I thought was super cool.
Yeah.
Really amazing. Clearly there's some serious chemistry going on there.
Yeah. And then it swells up and it tastes chewy and delicious. You can't cook it too much. You can have it in soups for days and it won't dissolve or swell too much. Yeah. So then that part I think is pretty easy. Oh, once it's done boiling in the lye, all you have to do is strain it. You don't have to rinse it. You just strain it through a colander and then you have your hominy. And we can keep going to preserving it because this I think is really important too. So I make hominy because this is such a big process to make the hominy. I make it in a really big batch. Like I'll do 2 or 3 gallons at a time. It's a good question. You put that freeze there. I just have some outside right now that's frozen and I'm thinking it might change its texture a little bit. Probably still be fine in soups, but I don't usually freeze it. Definitely it stays in the fridge for at least a week, completely unchanged. So that's a great way to do it. Oh, okay. But the way that I really like to store it is to dry it. So you can just spread it out on mesh sheets of some kind, whether it's like a wicker basket, anything that has airflow like that. Could use hardware cloth if you're not too concerned about, the galvanized wire. Anything with airflow is what you're looking for. Drying trays, plastic drying trays, and just let it dry. I'm sure you could use a dehydrator. I've done it in the sun. I've done it just in my house with a wood stove going and a good airflow. I think it's advisable to stir it or flip it at least once a day. And I have only just this year, I did have an issue with it growing surface mold. I thought it was completely dry. This is important. Put it in a bucket and I put something else in the bucket that was in a plastic bag. And somehow I think that plastic bag somehow created an environment so the surface mold grew all over the hominy. It was just very much a tragedy, except that I took all that dried hominy back out of that bucket and I rinsed it all off and scrubbed it and then put it in a pan and parched it. And then it was fine again. Didn't even taste like mold. So amazing story of recovery of surface molded corn. But in general, all the rest of the years I've done it, it's been very resilient, dries down, just rock hard, and really seems to hesitate to mold or ferment in any way as it's drying. Seems to be very easy to dry. So then once it's dried, you can put it in the soup and it'll be about half an hour. It's ready to eat again in the soup. And you can just rehydrate it in water, cook it for half an hour, and then you have all this cooked hominy that you can then, over the course of a week in the fridge, use on a daily basis to make tortillas with.
Yeah.
Actually, what is take like a half gallon of the hominy and grind it into dough, wet, and then store that wet dough over the course of several days, because then you're at the point where you can actually make a meal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Sherry Rovig put a question in here. Pressure can. I don't think pressure canning is even remotely needed here. I mean, the key to long-term preservation of the hominy is drying it, right?
Yes, but I'm sure that you could pressure can it.
I mean, you could pressure can it, but I guess my question is why?
Yeah. Well, some people really like to can things, and I don't see any problem with that. People do. I mean, the way that most people are familiar with hominy is buying it canned in the store.
That's
because
true.
People will buy like a big gallon of hominy and use it to make a huge soup. That's where I first encountered it too. So I'm sure you could pressure can it. I've never done it before, but yeah. I don't see why not.
Yeah. And one of the things we did was to rehydrate some of the dried hominy that Ellie brought with us. And this was our hearty soup ratio. It was so good. Oh my God. I don't even know how to explain the words. And so one thing we didn't have that day was a grinder, so that we weren't able to grind it. But I took some of the hominy home and put it in my food processor just to see if food processor would work. And it did. It worked really nicely. So for geekies who have food processors, it probably took about 2 minutes to get it to work into kind of a state where it was a dry, moistish paste. I think if you had a grinder that had metal burrs, or I guess Ellie, your grinder has like metal parts, right?
I use a Corona mill. That's just a hand grinder mill for grains. But I guess we should at least speak to the moisture level of the dough.
Yeah.
So when you take the corn, that's just as you can see in this picture, just the corn that you've just strained, you could fresh out of the pot from the first cooking, or if you've rehydrated it, you just strain the water out and grind it. And that should be the right consistency. Although I have had it turn out too moist or too dry. And in that case, you just add a little bit of flour or a little bit of water, I mean a little bit, like a tablespoon, like add the smallest amount you can and add a little bit until you get it to the right consistency. But the straight corn ground straight makes the right consistency for holding together for tortillas, which I think is really amazing.
This is a video of me showing you that texture. And for any soil scientist geeks, it's exactly the same texture as a 50% clay soil.
Okay.
Because it creates just a little bit of a ribbon. So when you squeeze it, you can see it holds together, and it'll kind of stretch out over my fingertips for an inch or so, and then it'll break. So it doesn't create a super long ribbon, but it doesn't crumble out of my hands either. So it's this kind of in between place. So again, play with it till you get the right texture, right?
All right, Ellie and Cindy, we are down to 7 minutes left in the Zoominar. So you want to wrap up some final thoughts?
Well, let's do questions if there are any. Other questions?
It was a delicious meal, let me tell you that.
Oh my goodness.
Oh, okay.
And in the glasses here was the liquid that we drained off of the rehydrated hominy. And I asked, well, do you guys do anything with this? And I'm like, I'm going to drink it. And it was really good.
It is delicious. I will give one more serving suggestion too, which I'm not sure if anyone else has really done, which is, oh yeah, there you go, favorite recipes. Here it's shown just eaten whole as a part of a meal, as a grain, and that does work. And soup is classic. Obviously tortillas are amazing, but I also like to eat it just as a breakfast cereal with milk and sugar and berries or whatever you prefer. It's very hearty. It really fills you. So yeah. I don't add anything to the ground hominy, not even salt, but you could. You could add salt. You could probably add herbs. You could probably really add some herbs. Man, I hadn't thought of that. Thanks.
Chilies. Ooh.
Yeah. Oh, you might be able to add like grated vegetables of some kind, grated carrots or something. Yeah, there's a lot of things you could do, I bet. Were there any other questions on the process at any point there? I want to make sure any technical things that I forgot might get prompted if someone asks a question.
Cindy, you'll be posting your super secret polenta recipe on the web.
I will be posting my super secret polenta recipe. It just didn't, we obviously didn't have time. We didn't have time to do what we wanted to do, let alone my super secret polenta recipe, but I will be posting that, yes.
Okay. Here is a question. Could you explain the difference between masa and masa harina?
Oh, there's no difference. Masa is just short. It's just slang.
Yeah. But the important piece is that masa harina, or masa, it's nixtamalized corn made into flour. So you can't just grind corn into flour and make tortillas. It just never sticks together. So the masa harina is nixtamalized corn that is then very finely ground. And so that nixtamalization process is really important.
I guess there's another recipe thing I could mention. When frying the tortillas, there's a really big difference with how much oil you use. So my preference is just to use a little bit of oil. You don't want it totally dry, but if you put too much oil on there, it can kind of interfere with the dough a little bit. It almost starts to integrate with the dough and make it fall apart and get hard to use, or else you have to cook it really hot, then your oil smokes. So I found just a little bit, just enough to coat the pan is about right.
And yes, tamales.
Oh my God. Please, somebody give some to me.
Yes. So we're going to obviously have to assemble a recipe book and or a list of recipes and kind of post these. If anybody has some, I know a couple of people who weren't able to attend the presentation said they use for pozoles, which is I'm sure I mispronounced that, but it's a soup that uses hominy. So if anybody has recipes they want to share with the rest of the world, send them our way, and we'll put them up on the Finland Food Chain website.
Yay!
Yay!
That's another good point. Aside from this wonderful webinar on the nixtamalization process, there are a number of other webinars that are recorded and available there too. So there's one on root cellars. Cindy, help me think of what some of the others are.
Root cellars, chickens, gathering foods throughout the season, wild harvesting. We did one on small grant writing. There's a bunch of really cool stuff. And we're going to be doing a really nice series of wet Zoominars this winter. So on pruning fruit trees, selecting seeds, planning for the spring. If there's interest, we might do one on business management, which nobody wants to do, but might be something that you want to learn about anyway. So, and if anybody has suggestions on topics that you would like to see us do Zoominars on, we are totally open. Let us know. Reach out to the Finland Food Chain folks and let us know, because that's what we're here for.
All right, last thoughts, anyone? Any last questions? We've got about 2 minutes left.
So somebody said vegan tamales. Oh yeah, absolutely. The nixtamalization process doesn't use any animal products. So you can totally turn that into vegan tamales, use whatever stuffings or other good yummy stuff that you want to use. Yes, and Fedco Seeds has a really nice selection of flint corns. They're out of Maine. So thank you for posting that. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Cindy, and thank you, Ellie, for sharing your knowledge. We sure appreciate it. Don't forget to go to the website, finlandfoodchain.org, to get more information and to see this video and the full slide presentation, including the videos. So thank you for joining us. And
so we have 2 really quick questions right here at the end.
Okay, perfect.
Is there a source for the varieties that we're growing? I know Stefan is on this somewhere, or he was. He's our seed saver dude here in Finland. And I know that one of the projects of the Finland Food Chain is seed saving. So I anticipate you will be able to get corn varieties that we've grown up in our areas. So again, if you're interested in getting seed, shoot us a message and we'll hook you up with that. And then where to buy corn, flint corn to eat, not grow. Any suggestions, Ellie? Anybody? I think this is a really important, I've always said that this would be a great niche for farmers markets, because there are definitely people who would love to buy this dried flint corn who can't grow it or don't have the space to grow it or whatever. So I think people who are interested in buying dry corn, start bugging all your local farmers markets and say, hey, somebody should start growing flint corn. I think that's a good idea.
So Absolutely. Far we haven't grown more than we could eat, but we did just expand and make a big 1 acre farm. So it's one of the main things that we grow, and there may be some.
So maybe next year, Ellie will be selling her painted mountain flint corn at the Finland Farmers Market. Yay!
And Dale maybe also, it looks like. Great.
Oh, and Dale Torma is planting 2,000 plants next year, some to sell. So, people who are on this, again, I'm just going to say, go to our website, contact any of the coordinators and pass along this information so we can pass it along to other people, because that's what we're all about. We want to connect people, growers with consumers and everything in between. So thank you again, everybody,
Yeah,
for attending. Thank you, Ellie, for being such an inspiration. It's been a joy to work on this project with you.
Good luck. Don't be shy to find me somehow. Track me down if you have problems or questions. I'm just happy to help anyone be able to benefit from the years of trial and error that I went through. So please let me know.
Well, I'm going to make hominy tomorrow, just so you know.
Great. Okay, guys.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye.